Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats with me, Phil the Glacial Geek. Today, I am going to be working on my Mephiston, who I got. I actually got this up at the Red Barn with some of my prize money from the Barnyard Bash Barnyard Brawl, which was a ton of fun. But as I've already gone over, but I got him, so hopefully he can help me keep kicking butt with my new Blood Angels and keep him getting better and better. So I'm going to be working on him, and maybe if I'm waiting to something to dry, maybe some more on my Eisenhorn, who's been sitting pretty not very used, and then my Ezekiel, who hasn't been painted very much in a while either. Got distracted with other projects, as it were. So today I'm actually going to be talking about I think a subject that rubs people get kind of upset every time a new codex comes out, and it's a topic that I feel like I've kind of dealt with multiple times with myself, trying to figure out where I stand and what I need, and kind of understanding the way people's reactions are to a lot of things. So what I'm going to talk about is how good does an army need to be? I know this is a topic that I'm sure gets a lot of people amped up, because every time a new codex comes out, people get upset. Like, bar none, they just get upset. That's inevitably what happens anytime a new codex comes out. So people are left with kind of I feel like they're left feeling disappointed no matter what the codex is. Like, the new Dark Angels Codex that came out, I feel, is the strongest codex that I've utilized, and I've used the 6th, 7th, and now 8th edition pretty extensively, and this is the strongest codex that I feel like we've had access to. And when it first came out, people were disappointed. They were very ho-hum about it. People saying that we got nerfed. Our codex can't do anything. It's not strong enough. How dare they? I'm selling my army now. I wish we could go back to, I don't know, whatever edition they thought we were better. And they're left in a situation where they're left wanting more. For one reason or another, there were a lot of people that really wanted more out of the Dark Angels Codex than they got, which is, that's their prerogative if they wanted more. But personally, I was ecstatic with what we got in the Codex, and it really bothered me for a while that there were so many people that were so negative about it, because they didn't have the 2-up Jinx save anymore, that they didn't suddenly make Terminators basically. I don't know what they could have done to Terminators. They could have made them 3 points each, and I feel like people would have been upset about it. But there were a lot of things that just came out, and people were just not happy with it. And it really boggled my mind, and I didn't quite understand why so many people were so upset with the Codex when it first came out. I thought that they made a lot of changes that made them competitive. There were some really cool synergies that you could get. And, things changed from the index to the Codex. And as they always will, and I think that's part of why we get excited for new codexes. But people seem to be very down about it, and this happens a lot. Like, you see it in pretty much every codex that comes out. A lot of people are very upset with the codex, and it kind of boggles my mind a little bit that no matter what GW does, everyone seems to be upset with the codex. And I think what it comes down to, and I've given it some thought and I've been thinking about it, I think that what happens is that people expect that the codex for their army that's coming out is going to be the top codex in any game ever. So they're left with the opportunity. I left a little bit of spruce or gating on there. I think that what they want is, unless their codex is undeniably the best codex that has ever been ever, people are going to be upset. And I think they're going to be upset because what it's going to do, I don't know, maybe that's part of the model. What happens is they expect to be able to go themselves win LVO with their army, with their list, with their models that they wanted to play. And if you look at any of the top people that play in the LVO, any of the top people that compete nationally for a lot of these things, they're not going into it looking to, they're not wearing their army's t-shirts. They don't have tattoos of their army on their body. They're going into it with whatever army they've been able to maximize the most usage out of, and they've found a tactic that works for them. And they have, they're not homers. Like, they're not going for the home team. They're going for whatever team it is that they feel has the strongest chance of winning, which is, in a competitive situation, what you need to do. But the game garners a lot of support one way or the other. I mean, I'm a Dark Angels fan. I'm going to run Dark Angels. That's the ones I'm going to try to go competitively with. And I can compete with them. I can do well with them. Do I think that their Codex is as strong as, say, the Eldar Codex? I mean, probably not. I bet you there's some things that you can find in their Codex that could beat anything that I'm going to bring in mind, especially if you're a really good player, But I still feel like I can go into any tournament and I have a chance to win against anybody, And I think that's what has come into this, is that people expect their army with their build to be the best. And if it's not, either because they really want to use units that are just not quite as optimal as others, or because they want to use their army and it's just not as strong as others, they're disappointed and angry. So, for instance, for Dark Angels, there's a lot of people that grumble because they say Deathwing should be more competitive. And it's not a fact that Deathwing aren't competitive. It's that Terminators aren't competitive. You don't see any build out there for any of the armies that really bring Terminators, that can bring Terminators, that are running a whole lot of Terminators for them being strong. That's just the reality of the situation with them being as expensive as they are because of their 2-up save, And the second you roll a 1, it never feels like they got enough utility out of them, and they die. And that's why they're not as competitive, is because they're relying on rolls that are just not going to come. Weight of Fire is going to start taking them down. And because they're expensive, because they're a low model count, each model lost really hurts. And it doesn't take a lot of, on average, you're looking at, with a 2-up save, 12 shots into each Terminator to take them down. 12 wounds, I should say. 12 wounds into each Terminator to take them down. So if you're looking at bolters, you're talking about, 24 shots into each Terminator, which is a lot, that's a lot on average, because you're, each shot, or maybe even more than that, I guess. But you're looking at, you need 24 hits, I guess, is what it comes down to with bolters into Terminators on average to take them down, because, each hit is wounding on 4s, which is half of them are gonna wound. So then you've got 12 wounds, and of that, 2 out of those 12 are gonna fail their armor saves. So you're looking at a fair number of shots that have to go in, but if you happen to roll more than those 2 ones, those statistically average, they go down, and it becomes harder to come back from that kind of loss. So the reality is that the game's not designed to have a competitive build for every single model. What it's designed to do is have every army be able to compete against every other army. And it takes some practice, and it takes some work to develop army building, list building, and tactics that utilize the strengths of these codexes to provide them with the most bang for their buck. So the most the most punch, and where each point is doing something to help you win. And that's what list tweaking is all about, what practicing with it is, and being aware of what your army is doing, and not just taking the things that you think are coolest to the games, but bringing the ones that you think can do the best. So, for instance, that's why I dropped my Predators. I really love Predators, but I can get more utility out of a Devastator squad with 4 las cannons than I can a Predator with 4 las cannons, because of the diminishing profiles, because of the fact that they're not going to get cover saves from just being in terrain, the fact that they can benefit easier from people like Azrael, stuff like that, my las cannon devastator squads are cheaper, and I get more utility out of them than my predators, so that's why they got replaced with that. Hellblasters are very good for their buck. For the points that you pay for them, they can do a lot. And when you add in the synergies of Azrael and a banner bearer and a lieutenant and things like that, and the Dark Shroud, suddenly those Hellblasters are punching way above their weight, and that's how you get a competitive build. So for Dark Angels, because we have the access to weapons of the Dark Age, stratagem, it means that they're even better than your average Hellblaster, which in and of themselves are still good. So you add into that, suddenly now as a Dark Angel player, you're kind of left, if you want to have a competitive build with Dark Angels, that's what you're going to bring. So if you don't like Hellblasters or you don't like Primaris models, you're not going to be able to find you're not going to be able to build the most optimal Dark Angel list. And if you really want to compete at the highest level of this game in tournaments, then you need to do that. If you're playing with your friend in the garage, or you're playing at the local game store, you're just having fun, then yeah, you can bring whatever you want and you can make a list that'll work with it. I've won games with Deathwing Terminators. I've won games with Ravenwing, but they don't do as well for me once I get into the more competitive scene, once I get into bigger tournaments. For me, Bodies on the Ground, Primaris models, and the Hellblasters are the way to go, and they've served me the best out of anything else that I've been able to find. But if that's not what you like, then I can see why you might be disappointed. But the thing is, you have to understand is that if you're gunning for, if you really envision yourself as a competitive player, envision yourself as someone competing for the top levels of competitive play in the LVOs or the any of the GTs anywhere across the world, then at that point you have to understand that your choices need to be made by what's best point for point, as opposed to what is the coolest model. If you're collecting to collect, coolest model wins out. If you're playing with your friends and you're not really going to tournaments, you're not looking to compete in tournaments, coolest model wins out. Every time, coolest model wins out. That's why I've got a ton of interrogator chaplains and chaplains, because I think they're some of the coolest models out there. But, you're probably not going to see me putting them into my competitive list just because what they can do, I can get more utility out of a lieutenant or Azrael or somebody else than I can out of a lieutenant, out of a chaplain or an interrogator chaplain. So what you need to do with that, so understanding what it is that you're looking to do is the first step to really appreciating what you get in a codex. So I think a lot of people's anger are at the fact that their preferred build isn't the best build. And I think at that point, it's not the codex's fault. It's your fault. If you're looking to be competitive, then you don't dictate what comes and make it competitive. You figure out what works best and make a list that utilizes those units the best. So I think a lot of the anger that people get about codexes comes from envisioning themselves as Nick Nanavati winning the LVO. And, each year, one person wins LVO. One person. And however many thousands of people play this game, most of them do not win LVO. Most of them do not win big GTs. Most people go and play at the local game store. Most people play with their friends, and most people play at smaller events that they can go to. And you don't need those highly optimized lists to win those. You do need a highly optimized list if you're looking to win something, like I said, like an LVO. So if you're looking at the codex as simply the codex that you're going to bring with you to win LVO, then yeah, most codexes out there are probably going to fall far short of what you want them to be. But most people aren't looking for that. Even if you're going to LVO, you're not looking to seriously take an aim to win. Of course you want to. Everyone wants to when they go to the LVO. But if you're being honest with yourself, you're probably not gunning for the number one spot at LVO. Because if you were, then you wouldn't be griping about the fact that your favorite unit isn't quite as good this edition. You would be looking through that book and finding the best units to bring with you. And that's what it comes down to. There's nothing wrong with having a favorite army, be it because you love their story, that's the one you were introduced to when you first joined into the game, because of the fluff behind them, because of the look of the models. That's cool. That's the best part of it. I love my Deathwing Knights. I love my Terminators. I've got 46 painted Terminators. 46 guys in painted Terminator armor with my Deathwing. I'm not bringing them with me to LVO. I'm not bringing them with me to a GT because they're not competitively strong. I'm putting myself at a bit of a disadvantage, and I need the dice to roll properly for me to do well against an optimized list. But if I'm just playing my friends and we're bring whatever we want to bring and we're just having fun, then I will bring Deathwing all the time because I love them. I think they're cool. I think they're great, and I have a great time with them. But I'm not going to get mad at a Codex that doesn't make Deathwing the competitive build for Dark Angels. What I do is I look at them and I go, wow, Deathwing are kind of cool. They got all these different options. I'm sure I'm going to play them in a battle report. I'm sure I'm going to play them with my friends. But then if I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, now I need to sit down and make a list for this tournament coming up. I'm probably not going to bring them. They're not going to add up into it. But that doesn't mean that I'm mad at the Codex. The Codex is just a bunch of rules. And what you have to do is you have to look into every Codex and find the synergies and find the units that are optimal to give you the output that you need to be competitive and that are able to handle different situations and different units and different armies. So with that in mind, I think the reason people always get mad at these Codexes and these armies when they come out is because they're not, like I said, they're not the top of the top. They're not meta breaking. And if that's what you're looking for, then honestly, you're looking to look at maybe one Codex. You're looking at the Eldar Codex if you're looking at that. You're looking at, even in Chaos, like each of these different armies, if you look at the top armies that are performing well at each GT, what you see is the first time a competitive Codex comes out, they do really well at the GTs. Like right now, the Dark Eldar are screaming up the GTs, doing really well, finishing the top levels of these GTs, because people haven't faced these new lists and these new armies with these new stratagems. As they've been out for a little bit, people start to have ways to respond to them. They know what to do. They know how to counter different things. So that's what you saw when Chaos Space Marines first came out. They were, incredible. And they still do well, and you can still perform very well with them. But people know what to expect. People know what to do. People know what's going to happen with different lists. If you see a 40-man squad of cultists, you know that their plan is to spend 2 CP to auto-pass that morale test, no matter how many shots you put into them. And then they're going to spend that 1 CP to bring them back in your back line, and suddenly you have 40 cultists, on your back. But people know that, and people expect that, and they start planning for it. So even when they screen out for deep strikers, they leave those screens deeper for longer, knowing that at any moment now you can have a 40-man squad of cultists that are now ending up, like I said, on your back. So what happens is right now, because these books keep coming out, keep changing, a lot of different armies can end up competitive for a while, and I think people want their Codex to be the meta breaker. And if that's what you're expecting when you look at your Codex, then most of the time you're going to be disappointed. Plain and simple, you're going to be disappointed, which is why I think people get the anger flares up and they start, selling off their armies or threatening to sell their armies or just declaring it garbage, like they did with the Dark Angel Codex. But if you look at your army and you look for it to have synergies that work, you look to it to have some cool, interesting, and fun stratagems, you look to it to have some fun and interesting units that work really well for them, then I think you can find that in every single book that comes out. People are talking about right now that the Death Watch Codex is coming out, and people are really screaming about the special issue ammunition on bikers and on the Primaris and the mixed Primaris groups. And there are people who don't like Primaris who are not happy. And it's like, well, if you're not going to be happy, if you don't like a certain set of models, then probably don't play Space Marines. Like if you don't like half the range, and you're upset because that half of the range that you don't like aesthetically or fluff wise or whatever it might be, if it does well, I mean, if you're upset about that, that's, on you. That's not on the Codex, plain and simple. If you don't like Primaris, then you shouldn't get upset that Primaris do well. You should look to see what else you can do with not Primaris. That's what it comes down to. Just because you don't like Primaris doesn't mean that anyone do. I love Primaris. I think there's some of the coolest models that have been coming out since I've been playing this game. I freaking love them. I like their larger size. I honestly like the fluff behind them. I think it's cool the way they operate on the table. I like the way the models look. I like what they've been doing, and I like the progress that they've been making now to the fact that you've got that you have mixed units of Primaris in the Death Watch is fantastic, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and I think it's super cool, and I'm really excited to get to play them. So should I not be able to have my favorite units because you don't like them? I don't get mad when other people's units do well. Dark Reapers are a pain in the butt to handle. It doesn't mean that I hold them a grudge. I don't call them garbage. I think they're really good. They're really good for their points, and I think if you're playing Eldar, you should have Dark Reapers. Plain and simple. Because they do really well. And especially if you're going to be playing in a competitive scene, Dark Reapers are going to be really good, and they're going to do really well. So bring them. Plain and simple. Bring them. You can try to find ways of not bringing them, but I feel like you're handicapping yourself at that point. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that if people look at their Codex and the units that they want to bring aren't the best units, it makes them upset, And I think what you need to do, look, when we had the 6th edition Codex and 7th edition, I ran almost exclusively Terminators. I had like 2 sets of Terminators and 2 Land Raiders that shot up the board and did really well for me with that 6th edition Codex, because you could take them as troops. They did really, really well, and they, punched a lot of faces, and I did surprisingly well with them in the, in the early 7th edition, when we had just the 6th edition Codex for the Dark Angels with the Deathwing. But then the 7th edition Codex came out, and you couldn't take them as troops. It became harder to utilize them. You had those formations where you could bring them, but they weren't quite as strong, and they ended up not coming with me to tournaments. I still played them, but they just didn't come with me to tournaments, which is fine. That's just the reality of the situation. And I think each Codex that comes out changes things a little bit. I ran a lot more Ravenwing in 7th edition than I do in 8th edition, because in 8th edition they're objectively not as good as Ravenwing were in 7th edition. So now in 8th edition, you have to figure out what does work well. Azrael made it onto like 0 of my lists in 7th edition. Even my friendly list, I hated bringing him. 215 points of garbage that you fail 1 4-up save from a melted to the face, and because it doubled him out, he's dead instantly because he didn't have Eternal Warrior. It was garbage. He was garbage. He didn't do anything well, and he died really quick. And, it became, I guess unless you parked him in the middle of 40 cyber wolves, he just wasn't strong. And because of that, I just didn't bring him. Now he's on every single one of my competitive lists, bar none. That's the first thing I put in. I put him in, and I put 3 troops, scout squads, to get in my min squads to get a battalion. And that's where I start base for all of my lists. He's that good in 8th edition. He just does so much. He does so well. He's got great synergies. His point level, I feel like, is very appropriate for what he does. And I like him. I like him a lot. His innate warlord trait is the one that I choose even when I have generic HQs as my warlords. So there's literally nothing to not like. He even gives you a free CP just for being your warlord. There's nothing not to like about running Azrael as your warlord. And because of that, I run him in every list. Even if in 6th and 7th editions, I just didn't bring him because he just wasn't good. He was too many points, didn't do enough, and he died quick. He was more of a liability than he was a benefit back then, to me, in my experience. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there, like I said, that like to run the Barkstar, like to run whatever, that he did really well for them. But for me, he was garbage, so he just didn't come out. And that's what it comes down to, is you can either be mad because exactly what you want isn't what happens, or you can be excited for what it is that you do get. So, like I said, for instance, all of a sudden now, we're the masters of plasma again. That became that's been a thing with Dark Angels. That's why back in the Dark Vengeance kit, we got a whole bunch of, plasma weaponry, and back in 7th edition, they were not very good. They would die real quick, and then the changes to plasma came about, so they didn't always get hot on a rolls of 1. And we also got access to weapons of the Dark Age, giving us a boost to the damage for our plasma weapons. And suddenly our plasma weapons are the best in the bunch. And plasma are really good this edition. So being the best of the bunch with plasma weapons that suddenly are some of the best weapons that you could bring is great. That means that we're competitive. That's how we get competitive. We're not going to get competitive by trying to hold on to things that happened previously. Our fifth edition lists are not going to be competitive in 8th edition. They probably weren't competitive in 6th edition. And that's just the reality of what happens, is that things change, and if you don't change with it, you have 2 options: either you give up or you get mad, and a lot of people choose mad. And I think that I don't think every army should be a meta breaker. Because if you have that, what you have is you have the issues of Codex creep that we had in 6th and 7th edition, where a new Codex would come out and they would just be the new hotness, and they would be the thing that broke everything, And I think in 8th edition, because they've been coming out so fast, because they're working on them at the same time, essentially, a lot of the rules, all the rules came out in with the indexes, so they all had people utilizing them. And then you have a lot of information that goes back before the new codex comes out. They've come out with the new codexes, and they've responded with things like chapter approved or the FAQs to help bring things back into balance, so you don't have situations that just get out of hand that don't get fixed. And because of that, that's where I think there's more parity in 8th edition than we've had in a lot of other editions, because of the fact that you get this balancing, the fact that they're all coming out kind of at the same time over the course of 1 year. I mean, over the course of 1 year, you would get 2 codexes previously. Now you're getting every single codex. That's pretty incredible, and because of that, I think you're left with a situation where you're there's more of this parity, and because there's more of this parity, it's up to you to find out how you want to be competitive with the army that you want to run. You know what I mean? And there are a lot of armies out there. I think there were a lot of armies out there that when their codex came out in 7th edition, they were incredible. They were just game breaking, and there was just no way to handle them. Like War Convocation from AdMech back in 7th edition was destructive. Like it was so difficult to face them and handle them back in 7th edition. And I think in 8th edition, they have a decent codex. They're not completely broken, and because of that, I think people feel disappointed by them. Same thing with the Tau, when all you had was 1,000 Riptides that just came out in Riptide formations, or you had the Tau Krondar coming out with the what was the Harvest, Canoptic Harvest, and Riptides and whatever else coming out playing together with those different formations. That became just unbeatable and became boring to play against. When you saw those things come out and suddenly they don't have that same kind of just dominant feeling to them, that gets people disappointed, because people want their army, their list, their personal preferences to be meta changing, so that all they have to do is plop down that list that they've been trying to play this entire time and win LVO with it. That expectation isn't the way it should be. I think you need to look at everything in comparison to everything else, and I think Eldar is strong. They do really well, but they're not unbeatable. You know what I mean? They're not winning every single GT. They're not winning every single game. Same thing with Astra Militarum. Same thing with Chaos Space Marines. Same thing with Dark Eldar. Same thing with Space Marines and Guilliman, and all of these different armies that are out there doing what they do. None of them are unbeatable. There were times back in 7th edition where there were armies that were just unbeatable, and you would just see the same list at the top every single time. You see different lists coming out. There are similar themes that you see coming up with depending upon it. Like you're going to see Hellblasters with Dark Angels lists. You're going to see Sanguinary Guard and Death Company with Blood Angels lists. You're going to see Shining Spears and Dark Reapers with Eldar lists. But there have been changes and tweaks that people have been making that make them more competitive, less competitive, differently competitive. And because of that, I think that's what I talk about when I talk about parity. What I not talk about with parity is I'm not thinking that I can drop an entirely Deathwing army and come up against, Nick Nadavati's Eldar list from LVO and expect to win. That's not parity. What it is I feel like if Nick brought his LVO list and I brought my optimized Dark Angels list, that I could compete against it. I don't know if I could compete against him as a player. He's really freaking good. But the lists, even if he took my Dark Angels list and I took his Eldar list, I feel like he could win. I guess that's what I mean by parity, is that, the better player is gonna win, is what it comes down to, not necessarily the better list. But the better players are going to make the better list. The better players are going to math hammer. The better players are going to test. The better players are going to go out there to try to give themselves the biggest, best opportunity to be successful. And when people look at their new codexes that come out and they see that they're not, that Nick Nadavati hasn't picked up their codex, hasn't picked up their army, when they see that their army isn't the top list at LVO, isn't the top list at Adepticon, isn't the top list at wherever, that suddenly they feel shorted. Suddenly they feel like that their codex is garbage, that there's disappointment in there, where in reality what they should look at is, can I play with this army? Can I play with it? Can it be fun? Because back in 7th edition, there were a lot of armies that were just plain old unplayable, and I don't see that happening this edition. I think every army has their units that do really well, that can make them compete in a game, especially in a less competitive game than you're going to see at like an LVO top table. Back in 7th edition, there were armies that just, even if you brought them to a friendly game, just weren't going to win. If you look at them now, though, everything can do really well. I've had my butt kicked by orcs. I've had my butt kicked by every single army, and they all do well. They've all got their own little like tweaks and bits and bobs that make them perform well and do well. And what you're left with now is like I said, the ability to bring your army to a game and have fun and play is really what you should be judging it upon, whether or not your codex is good or not. And right now, all the codexes that have come out have been good for that. People are, like I said, if your expectation is that suddenly you're going to break the meta and everybody's going to want to have to go out and buy your army, then you have set your expectations way too high, and there's going to be 1 or 2 codexes ever that are going to do that for you. And eventually they're going to get changed. So now suddenly conscripts are too expensive and not everyone's bringing Astra Militarum. Suddenly now you're limited on when your Shining Spears can drop in, or when your Dark Reapers, how many Dark Reaper squads you can take. And suddenly now that you see them getting taken less and less because of the changes that happen. And that's what the FAQs, that's what the chapter proofs are meant to do, is find that balance and find those things that make an army or a list so undeniably good that everyone wants to bring them, and bring it back into a level where all the other armies are at least, somewhat viable compared to them. That's what it comes down to. So that's, in my opinion, I think an army, if you can bring it and have fun with it at your friendly local game store, or have fun with it with your friends in the garage or in the basement, or have fun with it at a local tournament, then that's a successful list. That's a successful army. If just because a certain list that you wanted to run, for instance, when the new Dark Angels Codex came out, I was running a whole bunch of Razorbacks and Dreadnoughts, surrounding Azrael there, getting theirs 4-up invul save, and just kicking butt with them, las cannons for days, just shooting everything. It was a lot of fun to run them, but suddenly the Codex comes out and his 4-up invul doesn't confer to vehicles anymore, and I had to change my list. So yeah, if I was looking for Codex, Azrael, and Dreadnoughts, then yeah, Dark Angels Codex could be a disappointment. But I've had way more success with the 8th edition Codex of Dark Angels because I've been willing to use what was best in that Codex than I did in 7th edition, because of my ability to roll with what the new codex is, roll with what's in there, explore what's going on in there, and form lists that utilize the best units for those particular, the best units that for that particular codex. So now I run a lot of Hellblasters. I run Ancients that I've never used before. I run Dark Shroud, which I kind of used before because it's really, really cool. And I run Azrael like I did before, but now he's buffing other things. I now have Talon Master because previously I didn't really need it because I was making a stationary gun line. Now I want a little bit more movement, ability to respond and do different things. So, my list has changed. It doesn't mean that my codex is garbage. It just means that my codex is different, and it makes me think. It makes me have to try new things, and that, in my mind, is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So, yeah, I don't think every army should be meta breaking. I think that every army should be fun. I think that every army should have interesting things about it, have some fun little stratagems that make them interesting to play against, have certain armies that they do really well against, other armies that they don't do really well against. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is it just needs to be fun, and if it's fun, then it's a successful codex. If it wins LVO, that's, I guess, gravy. It's not even gravy. That's like some extra little handshake or whatever on the side. What I think a codex should do to be successful is just allow me to have fun, allow me to play games, allow me to bring an army that I want to bring, and be able to play a game. Not necessarily win a tournament, not necessarily destroy my opponent, but just be able to bring my army and have fun. And that's what it comes down to. So, yeah, I don't think every army needs to be meta breaking. I don't think every army should be meta breaking. I think every army should be fun to play, and I think they've done a successful job of that. So all the people that complain about these lists, I think that you're looking at it, in my opinion, I think you're looking at it the wrong way. I think that what you're doing is if you want to be competitive, if that's your goal, then you need to understand that you're not going to get to choose units that are necessarily your favorite looking or that have your favorite fluff behind them. What you have to do is you have to choose the ones whose numbers give you the most optimal chance of winning. That's what it comes down to. If you want to be competitive, that's what you need to do. And I think there are certain codexes that do it better, but I think every codex can be competitive in that sense. But if you're looking to have if you want to just play Terminators, for instance, you can. And you can have fun and you can do well, but not on a massive worldwide national level. So that's what I think it comes down to. I think that that people's expectations of what can do well in a list is probably the thing that sets them up for disappointment the most. So people that were looking for the 8th edition Codex of the Dark Angels to suddenly make Terminators incredible, that you're going to be disappointed. But I could have told you that you were going to be disappointed before the Codex even came out. I think that's just the way it happens, So, yeah, that's just my opinion. I don't think every army should be meta breaking. Honestly, in my mind, I don't think any army should be meta breaking, and I think that's why you've seen the FAQs and the chapter approves take aim at certain abusable situations and abusable scenes to try to narrow that kind of abuse down, because that kind of abuse is what makes it meta breaking, so that when a new codex comes out, if suddenly everybody in the top list is bringing that codex and everyone's bringing the same units, those units are probably unbalanced for what they do. And that's why you've seen the balancing that they've had. So increasing in pricing, narrowing, lessening the abilities of some of their powers or their whatever they can do, changing the way the mechanics of the game work to try to bring things back into balance. So suddenly those 5, the 5 Storm Raven lists that you would bring that were being dominant at ATC when 8th edition first dropped, you don't see that because A, you can only bring 3 of them, and B, you can only you have to have boots on the ground in order to keep playing the game. So, suddenly this game is way different for someone who wants. If all you wanted to do was just bring Storm Ravens, then yeah, you're going to be disappointed by what it goes. But every single time that we've seen a list and an army that's come out with a new codex that is suddenly broken the meta, it gets changed and it gets adjusted so that it no longer is going to do that. So you're not going to see nine Dark Talons on the board anymore because they got raised up in points. And they got raised up in points, I think, to a point where 1 or 2 is still viable, but an entire army of them, and suddenly you're hurting yourself. Same thing with Dark Reapers. They had, I think they had a slight increase in points, and narrowing down the fact that you can only bring 3 of them now. Dark Reaper spam is no longer a thing, and people talk about it, it's like, well, now they're just going to have larger squads of Dark Reapers, and it's like, yeah, but 3 larger squads of Dark Reapers is easier to handle than a dozen 3-man squads, because there's only so much DACA that you can put in to each of those squads to try to take them down, that suddenly you're split firing, you're trying to get yourself in optimal position to shoot them, and it just becomes nigh impossible to do. So now you play it there and you drop people in, and you can take out bigger squads by just heaving all your shooting into them and putting you into a position where it's harder to hide 3 10-man squads than it is a bunch of 3-man squads. So the balance that usually comes. So if your Codex does come out and suddenly breaks the meta, expect that it will be adjusted when the next FAQ comes out or the next chapter approved comes out, because that's what they've been doing. And I think GW feels the same way that I do, that no Codex, no army that comes out should be so meta breaking that no other option seems viable. And I think in 7th edition, there were times when that was the case, that it seemed like no other option was viable. You had to bring that. In 8th edition, I don't see that. I mean, you can even see just in the fact that, people like Nick Nanavati will go with Eldar Inari to LVO, and then at Adepticon is suddenly running Chaos Space Marines, or that, that, like I said, Eldar are all over the top spots at LVO, and now at Adepticon, the Tyranids take top spot. That's the reality, is that things change and it gets adjusted and it gets balanced out in the new 8th edition, which is at GW, they just call it Warhammer now, Warhammer 40,000. It's not 8th edition of Warhammer. This is it. This is the edition. This is what we have. It's a living rule book, and I think that's why you're going to see more balance come out, and I think you're going to see the meta is going to have its ups and downs as new stuff comes in and adjusts and changes the way things happen, but it's going to eventually balance out to where, you can bring a whole bunch of different, armies. Is Nick Navati going to probably bring a Grey Knights army? I mean, probably not, but can you do well with a Grey Knights army at like a local tournament or with your friends on a Friday night in, at the local gaming store? Yeah, you can. You could do well. I remember at Barnyard Brawl, my friend ran into he had a Nurgle Demon. Devin ran Nurgle Demons, and he was doing really, really well. Like, he kept, destroying a lot of his opponents. It was really tough to handle like 90 freaking plague bears. It became tough to handle all of that. So now he comes along and he runs into a Grey Knights army and in his bracket, and he struggled and wasn't able to win out against them because they're really good against them. So you can run in there if you want your Grey Knights to act as a bit of a counter to the demons. You can do it. They're going to do well at that. So that's the reality of the situation, is that every army can do well. Not every army is going to win LVO, but every Codex has the ability to be played to at least a certain level of competitiveness that still makes them fun. So, yeah, that's my thought on it. Not every army needs to be meta breaking. Not every army should be meta breaking. And if I had my druthers, no army would be meta breaking. And I think we're getting to that point more so. Once every Codex is out and once every Codex has had the ability to be balanced, I think you're going to see that there isn't a meta breaking from any of these armies, and that every army is going to have the ability to be stronger, that every army is going to have the ability to be competitive in their own right. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do you think that unless a Codex suddenly changes the meta, that it's kind of a disappointment? Is that what you look for in Codex? Which is fine. You know, I have friends who are very much in the competitive mindset that they're only excited for codexes that look like they're going to be the new hotness, you know? And then eventually an FAQ comes and changes it, so the new hotness is no longer the hotness. But that's what they look for, and that's fine. If that's the way they want to play it, that's why you want to do it, go for it. That's great. But is that what you look for, or what do you look for? Are you disappointed in your codex because it didn't live up to what your expectations were? And are you disappointed because were your expectations legitimately set to a good place, or were they a little bit maybe too high that in reality no codex was going to actually bring what you wanted? So keep the discussion going down below, what you think armies should do, what you think should happen, and what you think has been happening with the new codexes, with the new armies, and how things are starting to settle out in 8th edition now. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil the Glacial Geek as always. And until next time, have fun.